everybody at home. Thanks for tuning in to our weekly poetry series. I'm Nicole, the manager at Read It Again Bookstore, and I'm joined today by Lindsey Alexander and Leslie Sainz. So the way the formatting is going to work is each poet will read for 15 minutes, followed by a discussion on craft. Viewers, feel free to make comments or ask questions throughout, and we'll respond to them at the end of the readings. Lindsey is going to read first, so I'll introduce her. Lindsey Alexander is the author of Rodeo in Reverse, the 2017 New Southern Voices Prize winner selected by Sean Hill. She is from Kentucky, has lived in East Tennessee, which is where I met her, and now lives in Bloomington, Indiana. All right, Lindsey, when you go full screen, you can begin your reading.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here, faceless mob. I will be reading mostly from my book and then a couple of unpublished poems. So I'm really excited also to read with Leslie. It's been like a goal, wish of mine for a while, so glad to be doing that. Sleepless in Indiana, I contemplate the age-old arts. Dog that won't stop barking, and all I can think, I don't know anything about stars. Not what they're called or how they form, but how we turn stars into stickers to surprise our children and assure them, you are better than normal children. On boat decks, sailors cry out, Orion, and they see a man, but they've only drawn stick figure self-portraits of fire and longing. I tried to sketch my face one night with stronger brow lines, higher cheekbones, but it was all nose, scaly water moccasin, a viper me. I paid someone who drew me in red, with big hair, gaunter. The way he drew me made me see how lonely he thought I was. I rolled that portrait with wax paper and a rubber band, look at it during the Lenten season. That same spring or summer on the back of a boat, I caught a sunfish, baited him with gum. I didn't like unhooking him. Tore his lip. Astrologists shape stars into fish, take cracks at decoding futures. Palm reading hocus pocus, on my hand, which is starboard, port, and which is solar flare. I could use that hand to throw a tomahawk from this bed and hit neither boat nor star from way down here, so far from water. Another water poem. This, I think the only thing that you need to know is if you haven't heard of a singing bridge, it's just a bridge where the road on the bridge is like grate. And so when tires go over it, it sings or it hums. On the King Bridge in Frankfort, Kentucky. A tugboat tugs across the water, a coal load for Christmas again. That boat's only strategy? Slog through, slog through. On one end, the men at the White Light Diner staring down their burgers. On the other, the library with clouds painted on the ceiling to look like clouds outside. The children who don't hide in the library bicycle and bathe in an idyllic, warm TV glow. Growing up for me was fine, except on a bike I was a pansy. Idyllic childhood kids are braver. Some pass over the bridge in song now, their tires playing the grates like a steel harmonica. I piddle with my zipper. I fidget. It's unattractive. No minute thoughtless, each thought acute meaning tight squeeze, meaning serious. The tugboat blips and bleats. A nickel pushed over the rail, can't hear it drop or sink, to think the night's never quiet enough. Oh, Lindsey, you've complexed this bridge, just a thing to cross the water. But looking down, I can see the water too. Color theory and other wheels. So much effort expended on time. The magic trick I can do, turn busted glass on the road into diamonds under sun. An optimist game. It's October, and here I am again. Blue. Primary, primal, and cool. Lapis lazuli lepidoptera. In Florida, thousands of butterflies pressed into wall. One sort of garden. The the jewels collected and never worn, the furniture in the historic home, a sign, do not sit here. The past and the present I'm not allowed to touch, but it's on display, and like a bobbin underneath, tension maladjusted, it pushes through, catches or knots up any delicate design. Better to hand stitch, to clutch, than to rip seams, unwind, but all the time I have already let pass. Something or other about what's behind glass, the ache of being pulled both forward and back, except inanimately. I look and overlay my reflection onto a terracotta parrot and think of a real flapping parrot at the zoo. How I could see the red flight, my face, around it and through. The confusion of light. Let's circle back, one bird suggests at the end of winter. The flock flocks. Round like a hat box, perfect and cylindrical, their swoop of leave-taking, their return. I watch them take off. Give or take 6 months, I watch them land. What a landing, I say. I've been standing at the same window, waiting all season. Animal ritual, birds have their dignity, humans our small trespasses, me, I'm a spy. Forgive us our debts. I learned to say debtors at church, not like the line they say in the movies. Sin as something monetary, guilt as a thing owed until it isn't. A penny for my penance. I remind myself not to talk to birds, or else I'll end up like that Tuppence a bag woman, a loon. Besides, birds know what of guilt, what of holding in a sorrow, the confusion of light. At night, a star pulls me up like an alien beam toward a more thoughtful, appreciative existence. But just before, the small flame of a match burning me right to the quick. This poem is about Socrates, who I am definitely not an expert in, but to probably vastly oversimplify, Socrates is the guy that anytime you said something, he would ask you a question, which my younger sister is here, so I feel like I can't use the line I normally do, but I have a toddler now, and I feel like they're the younger sister / toddler of philosophy because they always have like an annoying question. The negation is the point. The Socrates I like really doesn't know anything. A gadfly can't be smug. If S were a lady, she would say, sorry, many times a day. Instead of revolting, would she maybe admire the miniature woodland creatures in the museum, carved from sucked and spat out peach pits? The glitter glue round the turkey's neck, the hummingbird's wings, its back hollow. As a young artist, the whittler, she would wonder if he were considered an odd fellow because near nothing and being met at his pocket knife's blade. Or didn't he realize? But would S ask? My guess is no, for probably discomfort in others made her uncomfortable, though she was comfortable in her own discomfort. Is S's silence less important than S's question? I consider this over buttered toast. I press my finger against the table to collect each crumb. I enjoy passing the time with Mrs. Bovary and eating toast, drinking gin and lemonade in the sun, watching a dog stretch or run, the idea of gardening. I'm unlikely to admit to knowing not a single thing. I'm still working on not sharing every thought I think or wonder in upward inflection. What makes a lady interesting? What she chooses to disclose? Landscape myopia. The panoramic view. I am a part of each scene too, but I can't stand back far enough to get it down or take it in. Closer, easier, a snowy egret tips its hat to me, proverbially. My epiphany? My periphery and blind spot. The flyaway blur. The not quite end. This poem is called Saudade, and there are several poems in the book called Saudade, which is an annoying thing that poets do that I am also doing and have done. And saudade is a Portuguese word that was explained to me as an intense longing, a yearning for, and it's kind of like nostalgia, but it's stronger and much more complicated. And it could be like a homesickness for something or someone that never quite existed, or is mixed with real or imagined memories, like a residual feeling, like you could, get a crush on someone you see on the bus every day, and you could have saudade for that imagined romance. Saudade. Kiddo, halt this bottle rocket. Cork its mouth so the ideas don't lose their flavor while no one's listening. Some men say the soul's a circle. And it's possible, sure, that souls could work like Venn diagrams overlapping or like horoscope charts. Coincidence sometimes feels so fateful, so fatal. But mine's more a line extending out farther, farther from me. An arrowhead at both ends, shooting. That's how growing feels, like the man accused of witchcraft, strapped to the pressing rack. More weight, a stretch toward death. Recall the lion that has a man position his head inside its mouth, slowly. The beast that won't bite down. The will Aesop's lion exerts in not eating the mouse. Or consider the insistent modesty of a brown dwarf star, one that fails to ignite, only detectable by its gravitational pull. For some time, I replaced my bedtime prayers with the steady counting of worries. But things have changed. When now I lay me down to sleep, I request that if I'm good, I'll come back as a horseshoe, feeling the ground for the horse, because the horse ought not to feel it. Homestead, sure. But then there's the beauty of the rodeo. The buck and nod, that arch and stretch against gravity. A bronco's no square peg. Neither am I. Pegs or no, we both flex our more resistant muscles. Strong-legged, strong-willed. To learn might is the ticket. The power of my unrelenting. When I expose exactly how pure, how, if stubborn enough, entire I can be. And now I will read a couple poems from not my book. This is a poem that references Moby Dick, which is a book that I have been making my way through since before I knew I was pregnant, and I now have a 10-month-old. And so this quote is from Moby Dick. In a word, you would have two backs, so to speak, but at the same time also two fronts, side fronts. For what is it that makes the front of a man? What indeed but his eyes? Look your last now on these venerable hooded heads while they yet lie together, for one will soon sink unrecorded in the sea. The other will not be very long in following. And I should say, I think he's referencing a whale. Spoiler. Log, day 92. Hair inside me and nails inside me, a creature like a vole spending months plotting and burrowing out. Sometimes I gasp. I want to ask the gas station attendant, the person giving me trouble at the pharmacy, don't you know there are eyes inside me? I can see the inside of myself and watch from outside and inside as we grow. 2 brains floating, 40 claws, get thee away! Other times I hurl and nothing comes. 3 months of sickness like being a whaler at sea on the hunt for something I can't see, only feel, enormous underneath, somewhere between God and monster, and nothing yet at all might kill me, but the beauty. I'm turning Ahab who swallowed a watermelon seed. I was warned. My eyes, my new beard reveal me. I hold a second secret face, unknown even to me, like that of a clock that keeps its own time, slows its tick each day. If Ahab could become the whale, then part ways, yes, two-headed, double-pronged approach of before. Yes, yes, love is an ugly science, and I could harpoon it. The whole swooping cape of bloody aftermath, a mean relief in knowing what's next, an arrival into what? Into who? To. A years-long tracing of it away from here, from near, the both of us then, seeing only once again, out to sea. And this is the last one. Thank you guys so much. And I feel like the band that plays before the band you want to see, so I feel very excited to hear Leslie. I married a good man, and life is hard anyway. My heart is a night bloom against the fence. Sisters with secrets keep distance, diffidence. In the middle, I'm at frayed ends. I text and text until I am text to my friends. But as text, which letters could be my breasts? No one can feed my son. I want to thus with a kiss this to poetry. Instead, I wait and resist ending, but nothing else comes to me. Lyricism could clarify, but don't I use it to obscure? Look at this image over there. I remember when I prayed for nothing. Lord, let it be nothing. But it was something, and I knew it. Thank you.
That was really great. Thank you. I always love the details in your work. They're delightful. And we have a lot of happy listeners out there too. Next up is going to be Leslie. And Leslie Sainz is a first-generation Cuban-American born and raised in Miami, Florida. A 2019 National Poetry Series Finalist, she received her MFA in poetry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she was the editor-in-chief of Devil's Lake. Her work has appeared in or is forthcoming from AGNI, Jubilat, Narrative, Black Warrior Review, Ninth Letter, Hayden's Ferry Review, The Journal, and others. She's received scholarships, fellowships, and residencies from CantoMundo, the Miami Writers Institute, the Adroit Journal, and the Hub City Writers Project. She was a 2018 to 2019 Stadler Fellow at Bucknell University and now works as the outreach manager of the Hub City Writers Project. All right, Leslie, when you go full screen, you can start.
All right, thank you so much. Lindsey, listening to you read is an absolute gift. It is surreal to think that this is the closest we've ever gotten to reading our work in person around each other. So thank you so much for recruiting me for this fantastic event. Thank you, Nicole, and everybody at Read It Again. It's an honor to be here and to share this space with you. And thank you to everybody that's tuning in and is choosing poetry on a Friday night. I'm going to read a couple poems from my manuscript in progress. And in the spirit of reading newer work, I have two poems, very raw, new poems that I'm going to read tonight as well. And the first two poems that I'm going to start with are from an American sonnet series in my manuscript. They're sonnets for orishas, which for those who don't know, orishas are sort of like saints in the Santeria religion. And so this first poem is Sonnet for Elegua, and he is the Orisha of doors, roads, and destiny. And you can't talk to anybody else in that religion unless you talk to Elegua first. So I think it's appropriate to start with that poem. Sonnet for Elegua. If there are 101 ways to understand you, let this year be none of them. In its place, the evening under the oil palm when you gave me my own hands. I have strayed, yes, left unlucky as the neighbor boy kicking up road dirt, how he swats at its iron like flies. 3 summers ago, he killed a pigeon by hurling it against the wall of a market. It made sounds like the latch rattle of an icebox, and the stain never came out, even when we used aguardiente. I've left my outline in worse places, lately by the window, where I count the women with thicker, blacker hair, study the way it tightens around their shoulders like bulls ascending. What occupies me is also running. It never tires, but rather repositions itself. I should like to reposition myself, please. All of me this time. The second sonnet is for Ogun, and Ogun is the Orisha of metal, energy, hunting, invention, a very masculine figure. Sonnet with Ogun. Plátanos frying in a cast iron skillet. Wind gone wrong, gone the tamarind tree from the overgrown easement. I've aged. Once, a Yankee lover tried to make me tostones. He didn't know you have to fry them twice, a show of muscle in between. Now, I brandish a plate that is not mine, from a cupboard that is not mine, and a house I no longer live in. The men working on the neighbor's renovation play the same song on repeat from a small silver boombox, even though their hammering eclipses all other sound. At the dinner table, I learn that science no longer recognizes the shape of my father's spine. Later, when I clean the kitchen, I drop a knife on the floor again and again, just as an excuse to touch it. For those who know history, Fidel Castro died a couple years ago. Big moment for Cuban people. And in the Republic of Cuba, there was a state-sanctioned period of mourning for 9 days. And I was fascinated by that. And I wrote this poem, which is called Bodied or Day 1 of 9. I am still underground when I hear that the alligator man is dead, belly up and awaiting furnace. Father delivers the news along with my daily rations, his hands dutiful and nurse-like. Bicho malo nunca muere, he says, dropping the rope into the well. I know this to mean, do not celebrate. There is little difference between being followed and being haunted. With each passing hour, I learn more about chance and limits. I learn that the earth has a jaw too, swallows at will like a man. When I was younger, I thought only the ocean could make things disappear. A raft, a family. I now suspect everything takes orders from somewhere. There are lots of dead rats in the well, but one is fatter than the others. He has a large red gash on his forehead that looks like a salute, so I name him El Comandante. In the well, I'm the one that gives speeches. I prop El Comandante into a kneel and talk at length about legacy, how easy it is for a tide to erase decades of work in the sand. Less than a mile away, the wild applause of metal on metal. When I finish my speech, I take a bow. Mother visits at night and speaks of rescue. She says the men meant to liberate me are organizing the best they can, that they still need time. I lie down in the black water and think about history. My blood so patient, my back so wet, there's a name for it. So ever since travel opened up to Cuba recently, or in recent years, a lot of people want to talk about Cuba with me as a Cuban-American. And often they fetishize the island significantly and choose selectively what to experience while they're there. And I wrote a poem in response to that. And this poem is called, "Why Aren't You Running to Do What Your Nature Demands?" Or "Why Haven't You Visited Cuba?" I meet them in line at the deli counter, the post office, someone's graduation. I know better than to speak Spanish, but La Gringa will smell it on me, will see the sawed-off other tongue writhing in my pocket. Her eyes will search me without the gleam of gloves, and though her first question is unrelated, she'll think immediately of the green bananas, how strange the locals that ate them. After my first courtesy laugh, she will introduce me to her husband. He'll place his hand on my shoulder or the small of my back, and I'll know he still touches himself to the thought of the women, their breasts gorging like brown water barrels. He is the first to say, Cuba. He exaggerates both syllables so the country rhymes with an instrument, but also sounds like a faulty police siren. Together, they repeat the story of the slow, if at all, internet, how they thought it a prank and novel. When they reach for their phones, it is time for the musts. You must go here, see this, or you must be dying to, but never, you must have your reasons. I want to tell them I have lived in the byproduct, the runoff. I want to say I live as the dream body. The tongue in my pocket salivates. I won't ask them if they know who their dollars satisfy. I won't answer the question for them. And the last poem I'll read from the manuscript is actually for my paternal grandmother. She passed away recently, and so I wanted to take this time to honor her. And this poem is called Remedios para Beatriz. When God was a boy, the dirt was dark red and the myths of women explicit. Just enough of the world had been distributed to know what was possible, what you didn't or couldn't have. Love hid in the kernels of handsome mamey fruit. We sorted through piles of black beans in case they lied about its whereabouts. We built ladders we were too tired to climb. We cried. Eventually, we cried so often we were forced to invent salvation. We'd fill the largest bucket we could find with the coldest water. We'd sit the crier down and crowd behind her. After several synchronized breaths, we'd lift the bucket and tip it downward. What was left no longer resembled crying, but we chanted, come back to us, anyway.
That was fantastic.
Oh, I think she has.
You have more?
I have two more, but it's totally okay. If we need to move to discussion, I'm more than happy to do so.
You absolutely have time. Kim just got excited.
Oh, okay. No, that's quite all right. They're short. I tend to write shorter pieces. And thank you, Lindsey, for translating that moment. So actually these next two very short poems are taken from a 3131 that I recently did with some very close friends of mine. So shout out to the 3131 crew. So I won't explain them. I will just read them. And the first one is called Reenactment. Jesus didn't strangle anyone on top of a hill. Instead, I cry when anything trembles. In the beginning, nobody moved but God. God tugged on a pull-down projector and broadcast whiteness, only whiteness, while we looked away mostly. Do you, as I do, have the tendency to feel helpless as rain hammers the ground like just struck bronze? I speak with the fear that there are 3 wheels inside me instead of the usual 4. Somewhere in the West, a child dreams of an upright deer. The deer is conspicuous, like a Civil War-era camera. I have never taken a picture of a loved one for fear of them dying. They die, and they die anyway. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I appreciate it. And also for giving me the space to read these final 2 poems. This one is called Permissions. The sun is a cop, and we know it. I, myself, could never outrun dread, the hem of my skirt catching damselly on the nearest chain link. For the group, calculate the number of times a screaming woman gets your attention. Divide it by the number of times she doesn't. We don't name things after virgins anymore. The dandelions are gone, and I can't bring them back. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Sorry, I'd be happy to listen to you read for another like half hour. I'm sorry we couldn't do it there.
No, that's quite all right.
Well, now is the discussion portion of the poetry night. So if anybody has any questions in the comments, feel free to ask them. Meanwhile, I know you guys said you wanted to talk about how all the global and personal upheavals and how those are impacting your writing. How would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Of course. Everything happening at once. I was trying to think about what I would say about this earlier today, Leslie, and like in the shower, I had a whole monologue prepared, and now I'm like, I guess the first thing would be to say, I would think if you're here listening to poetry on a Friday night, I think you're aware of like the global upheavals that are going on. But just like personal upheaval for me over the last while is last year I moved interstate, and I had my first kid, who I love very much, but like upheaval, and since then have had some health issues going on that I don't necessarily want to like talk about on the YouTubes, but just kind of like place in upheaval, life in upheaval, family upheaval, body upheaval, and so maybe that's a good place to start too, is Leslie, if you can just maybe talk a little bit about what's been an upheaval for you personally in recent times.
Sure, absolutely. I just want to say, as a perfectionist type A person, I absolutely empathize with the shower monologue preparation. I'm very familiar with that practice. Similarly, I've had my own move. Last year, around this time, I was in Pennsylvania, and then I moved to Miami, and I was back home in Miami for a month or so before I moved back to South Carolina, where I had been for 3 months for a residency prior. And I think when you're chasing opportunities, especially as writers, which, you know, we're very fortunate to be able to acquire such opportunities. You know, it's hard to say no to those things. Just the way that the industry is set up, and the way that we're taught to believe a linear career path looks. You know, you hop around often, and I did not take stock of how much that transient lifestyle was providing an upheaval for my body, I would say, for my spirit, for my mind. And so that difficulty is still something that I'm trying to work through in a lot of ways. And it's interesting that you mentioned the idea of place too, right? So thinking about your press, Hub City Press, and how their work focuses on work from the South, the American South region, and how place-based literature is so important to them. And thinking about the intersections of having a body of work that can speak to a specific place in a landscape, but then, you know, Rodeo in Reverse has taken you so many places, you know, and even what does it mean to be reading, you know, place-inspired work to everyone and anyone in this moment. And I feel similarly in my own writing, you know, if I'm writing about Miami or I'm writing about a fictionalized version of the island of Cuba, you know, it's thinking about the way we shepherd ourselves, I think emotionally, but also physically. It's particularly in this time when we're being told not to be moving around at all. There's still this sense of kind of kinetic movement in our feelings, but also in our conversations too, I think.
Yes, I feel that. I feel that pretty intensely. Also, I don't know about you because I think more recently you've been moving a lot more frequently. But like it takes a really long time for me. I feel like in comparison to other people of our generation, but that might just be a misinterpretation on my part, but to feel at home somewhere. Like, and like thinking of that too, in terms of the global upheavals, like one being like, oh, you don't feel at home. Now you're stuck in your house for 90 days. And then the other being, I'm not really at home. Like, I don't know the landscape. Like in Tennessee, I had lived there like 4 years-ish, a little over. And so I, you know, knew who the community organizers were. I knew who to listen to. I knew like what to do if that was helpful. I knew my role. And here I feel very much like I don't know anything, which is, it's not just a feeling, it's a fact. But also like, I was talking it over with my therapist where I was like, if I still lived where I used to live and I didn't move, like I would understand how I'm supposed to, and she like let me go on with that because that's how they make their money. And then I was like, but maybe also if all of these things were happening and I had just had a baby, I also would still know not, like my life would totally be in upheaval and I wouldn't know what to do because my life is totally different than it was like 2 or 3 years ago. And she was like, and so like, it's, I guess all that to say, like how, what you're saying about like, just like getting to a point where you're like kind of thinking, oh, these upheavals have had like a big impact on my bodily person much. And then like, I feel like the next level is like, once you take care of this, like to be like, and what effect has it having on me? Like my psychology and like my feelings of self and like, and I don't really have any answers to that. I feel like I very much, so if you have answers to that, I would love to hear them. But I think too, like I would be interested how it's affecting maybe like, I know that like how it's affecting maybe your writing practice or how you're writing, how you're finding time to write or.
Sure. Time to write.
Remember those days?
Hardly. I thank you for bringing up psychology, because I've been thinking a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I realize is just like bottom feeder psychology, I think.
That's where I am in my understanding of psychology.
Same. Yeah, exactly. But for those who aren't familiar with it, essentially, Maslow said, we need food, water, shelter, sure. But I've been thinking a lot about the next most important thing that we absolutely need, and which is quite vital, which is a sense of safety. And I've been thinking about that in the context of who gets to feel at home. I think particularly in this moment where more people than ever, thankfully, are paying attention to movements like Black Lives Matter and are amplifying voices of Black, Indigenous people of color. I think a lot of people didn't realize that a lot of people have never felt at home, either in this country or even in microcosms, in their offices, at school, wherever it is. And so I think I've been juggling that at present, also with the idea of, there's the popular adage that home isn't necessarily a place so much as it's the people and the community in that space. And what does it mean to have never necessarily felt at home or safe at home, but also to not, because of we're in a global pandemic at the same time, how are we to feel at home when we can't be with our people anyway? And so I think, looking to last year and where there was a lot of, in my life at least, a lot of movement, I think I took a sense of home for granted in a lot of ways. And I think I took the spaces in which I felt most safe, or more safe than I do now, for granted as well. And I don't know how to reconcile that at the moment, personally. And I think perhaps my work is attempting to talk about that. You brought up the question of a writing practice, right? And how these things affect consistency or a lack of consistency, right? Which honestly, it depends on the day. But to answer that question, sort of separate from the context I just set up, I would say structure. Structure is probably the thing keeping me sane at the moment. And a lot of my loved ones as well have really regimented their life in order to feel that sense of purpose or productivity that they felt back when the world was an open space that people could explore, again, freely and safely, or more safely than now. So yeah, I mentioned before those the final two poems that I read were from a 3131, and that is a practice that I got into in graduate school. Sean Bishop, program administrator at Wisconsin, has this wonderful habit of about twice a year reaching out to current MFAs and fellows and alumni, and just saying, let's get together and try and write a poem every single day for a month. And it is a sadistic and masochistic process that I have kept with me ever since. And I find that I intentionally inflict that kind of pain on myself when things are already pretty dark, just to really see how far I can go. And I guess that would lead into my question of, does writing ever feel like a punishment sometimes? And I think especially in this moment, And if so, what state of mind do you have to be in to inflict that upon yourself?
Oh, well, I have an answer.
Perfect.
Well, okay, so I'm going to backtrack, and then if I lose the thread, please remind me of the thread. So the first part is, I think that you're really generous in your interpretation of white people. Because I think like part of, well, and obviously like I'm not a historian and I'm not a sociologist, so this is just some lady who's been in her house for a long time. Is that people like, I feel like most white people who are like true adults, okay, like not like you know, sorry, I call kids baby men. Baby men. They have, I feel like part of the reckoning of this moment for them is like that we all have known what's going on, because how can you not know? Or most of us, you know, most of us who are like savvy in pop culture and, you know, like people in our generation in general, and like, what have you done? Nothing. Okay, well then you have to reckon with that. And the way that most people are like, I can't tell whether it's because of like, it's so hard to be honest with yourself, which I feel like we can like all understand, like when you realize something about yourself that should have been obvious to you, or if it's, I basically can't tell if it's like a lack of self-awareness or like a pretense for how things look. And I think maybe it depends person by person, but that like, to deal with it, I have to tell myself that I didn't know until just now.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? Like not me personally, but I wonder a lot about that. Anyway, so there's that. Then, like as far as like, I think doing a 31 for 31, it like, I guess my perspective on when I do that is like very much like, I start out every year like Charlie Brown with a football. Like, you know, I'm like, yes, like, yeah. And then like, there's like 3 days where they're very bad because it's like, oh, I haven't been writing poems for a while, really. Right. And it feels like worse because they're not just in my notebook. They're like sent to another person who witnesses them being really bad. And then there's like a little like crest of hope. And then like, you know, you haven't written for 3 months and like, you just have like 3 words a day sometimes that go together. So I think like, I'm not sure for me that it comes from the sadistic place or that I'm very good at tricking myself into being like, no, like, or masochistic, like masochism is good for you. It's fun. I've been known to do that. So that's possible. I think like for me, like the question about whether writing is a punishment now is like such a good question. Because I think like, especially after the book stuff, it was very like, okay, so my goal in life like was pretty much to do this and now it's done. And I hopefully have a lot of life ahead. And so if I'm just doing this for me, then don't I need to make it something that's like nourishing and enjoyable and like potentially serves others if, you know, but like, don't I want to kind of enjoy it? And you would think that the answer would be like resounding yes. I think it is, and that sounds so like cheesy, but like in my heart, but in the day to day, it can be very much like, I've had to work and still work very hard at like being like, oh, I haven't written something good in a long time, or I haven't written something that's not just like a journal entry or a, you know, and also I am so in awe of all these like young parents, I'm going to say particularly young moms who, like mothers of young children, not necessarily like young themselves, who, are writing about young motherhood, because I feel like the poetics of being a mom of a young human are like, like they're wordless. Like I literally, the only emotional word that I can come up with it ever is like overwhelmed. Like John will look at me and it'll be like, what are you feeling? And I'm like, it's not bad. It's not good. It's like all, and so in that way, I feel like the personal and global upheavals, like kind of mapping themselves, you know what I mean? Of just like,
Sure.
I feel really impressed by people who are stringing together sentences right now. And so like to do a 31 for 31 during all of this is like, both like I'm laughing at you and with you and in support of
Good.
you.
Thank you.
But I guess your question of is writing a punishment. I think like in some ways there's a Donna Tartt quote that I'm going to mess up that a mentor passed along to me, but it's basically like, if I'm not enjoying this, like almost every time it's because I'm trying to go too fast. And so it kind of like, when I'm able to like live at the epiphany of that idea, it lets me go slow or like take a day off or, a couple of weeks off and not feel like, but it's hard. I feel like getting off of Twitter and like limiting social media and like, that sounds stupid, but things like that have helped me, because it's like you see other people and it's like, wow, everything's suddenly happening for this person, like in that way where you can tell, like I can tell myself like, yes, but they had years of work that you didn't see, but it's like, it's in my face. I need to be like scurrying.
Sure.
But yeah, sorry, that was a very rambly question. Or answer. I'm like wondering, for you, like you have one manuscript that's finished and like you have this like these new poems happening. Do you have a sense that you are like quote unquote working on a second manuscript, or are you just writing for enjoyment or punishment or
all very good questions. To speak to the first part of your response again, see, we're just going to keep trading back and forth here. I kept thinking about the word discomfort, and actually in both contexts, I think. So I think a lot of people, whether it is a recent reckoning, something that they have repressed for a while, or whatever else, whatever the timeline looks for people to come to the realizations that they're having right now. I think what's being asked of people across the board is to be comfortable with discomfort, which I think is a really a very difficult thing to ask of people in general. We are creatures of comfort. We want what we want when we want it. And I think now more than ever, it's so easy to turn a blind eye to things. And so I think I agree. I have needed to stay off social. There are a couple of days where I'm like, okay, I cannot see anything right now because it is so overwhelming on top of everything else that we're intaking constantly. But at the same time, I guess it's something like hope, something with feathers that's around when I see people who I never expected to be having the kind of difficult conversations that they're having, or at least posturing about having too. That's happening adjacently, unfortunately. But still, I do think that there's something hopeful about the way maybe collectively we're deciding that maybe even in an evolutionary sense, like we can sit with discomfort. You know, what would that look like if generations past have just kind of inherited this ability to sit with what frightens them or what challenges them in this particular way. And I guess leading into a discussion of poetics there, I think what I'm looking at now is a sort of poetics of discomfort. I think syntactically, I'm attempting to do something a little different. I think my leaps between lines, I think I want to take up more space despite there being smaller poems. I want them to feel larger in the ways that I maybe personally don't allow myself to be. And so that for me is an uncomfortable thing to do, even if, again, the length of the poem itself is rather short. But as far as juggling the two projects, I never thought that I would be someone who would be working on two things at once, or have one thing done and then sit on another. I'm such a completionist in that way, and it sort of feels like I'm cheating.
I knew you were going to say that.
Which my partner is watching, so know that I would never. But I poured about 5 years into the completed manuscript, and so it's very strange to call it finalized, because it means that I don't engage with it very often, and it's a conscious abandonment. It doesn't haunt me in the way that phrasing might imply, but I guess I'm circling an answer without saying anything really. Yes, I would say that what I've been working, I have two different projects. And really it was born out of just the restlessness of sending a manuscript out. My goodness. I've been very fortunate to work as an editor and edit other people's books post-publication. That's how Lindsey and I met. And I just hope on behalf of every author that I've worked with that I was as kind as possible, because my goodness, the scars of just sending out a manuscript and really just putting the work out in the world and really stepping into the business side of things too. It requires a different kind of brain. So yeah, the project that I'm working on now that's very different from the manuscript was really just born out of this restlessness while submitting to, starting to submit. And honestly, I make it sound like it's really been this horrible, arduous process, but I've barely done that work. I've let fear get in the way of really letting it, try to fly on its own. But I committed with a
Can I just interrupt you for one moment?
Sure.
I just want everyone who's watching to know that Leslie's book was a finalist for the National Poetry Series. I mean, yeah. And so, please, I just want you to know, one, you are allowed to have all of these feelings, but also, her work is doing really well in the world too, but it is still really difficult, like you're saying. I'm just a hype girl. Continue.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. That is so very kind of you to say. Yeah, honestly, I may be whining a little bit about the process.
No. I don't think so. I just was saying, but even I think sometimes, right, which that sounds, it's it is a whine, but it's also true of
Sure.
the closer you get without getting the thing makes it so much harder.
Yes, there's definitely that aspect. Sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
There are a couple of questions in the comments that you semi-addressed, Leslie, in talking about what you're working on now, kind of. Rowena wants to know what you guys are inspired to write about next. And Rebecca says, when you write poetry, do you usually have the poem subject planned to include in a collection with a particular theme, or do you discover it during the writing process? So you were talking a little about engaging with the theme of discomfort and writing about that now. Is there more to their questions that you'd like to answer?
Yes. So actually, again, I was kind of circling the drain instead of just allowing the water to go down. But so once I actually, I sent to the National Poetry Series last year, and then it was the first time I had ever sent the manuscript out. And I said, okay, I have to distract myself with something. And I was fortunate to get a scholarship to the Miami Writers Institute. And randomly, I had come across a YouTube video of a woman named Esther Hicks, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with her, if they've ever heard of Hicks Abraham Publications. But Esther Hicks is a woman, along with her husband, her late husband, Jerry Hicks, who basically created the phenomenon around The Secret and the law of of attraction. And she believes that she gets possessed by this infinite intelligence, and that it speaks through her, and through that she is allowing people to examine their own vortexes, and it's very impassioned. So I want to preface this by saying, if anybody is a very deep believer in that and you're watching, more power to you. I personally—
They already have the power.
That's true. It's within them all along. Yeah. I personally think she's a con artist. And I have now for about a year been watching a bunch of interviews and sermons, so to speak, that she gives. And I have been writing persona poems from the perspective of Esther Hicks. And so these two from the 3131 are kind of adjacent to that voice, but I kind of chickened out and didn't read any of the Esther poems that I've been writing because they're so strange and difficult to read. But hopefully everybody's kindness here will inspire me in future spaces to attempt to try those poems out. But that's what I'm working on right now. And unfortunately, and I say this again because I guess I'm on the kick of believing writing to be a punishment, at least it feels like it today. Unfortunately, I have so many of those that it is starting to look like another manuscript. So that's what I'm presently working on. But I'd love to hear, Lindsey, what your poems are pointing
towards. I am I'm obsessed with that idea, because I feel like if you follow any influencer on the internet, they all lead back to her.
Yeah.
In this way that you're like, but I'm just doing a workout video. Why?
Mm-hmm.
I'm so excited for that. Then as far as what's been interesting me, what I've been working on, I am not surprisingly very interested in motherhood and my kid. And I've been writing since I was pregnant, lots of poems to him and about him. And I'm not sure that they're for anyone but him. I think part of it is, I think it's three things. One is it's really difficult for me difficult might not be the right word. But I tend to not share the things that are most dear to me publicly. Which is a good thing and not a good thing. But I'm not an effusive praiser. I'm not, so if I give someone a compliment, I really mean it, and they hold on to it like, their crust of bread until our relationship dies or whatever. But I don't know if those will become anything. I think also I've been really interested in, like, to what we were talking about before about upheaval, like, I have not been reading poetry, honestly, that much lately, except for individual poems that I, you know, like I see people post something and I want to read my friend's poems. But I feel, and I wasn't really able to put words to it until recently, but I feel like I feel very out to sea, and I feel like in an immersive experience that I don't have language for. And so what I really want is like, I'm reading Moby Dick. I like read Jane Eyre in the fall. Like, I want something that's like 400 pages and like, and it's not quite an escapist vibe. I mean, it kind of is because it's not my life at all. But it's more like, oh, these, like, this is a bewildering place that I can be in. That's not my bewildering place for a long, long time. Or like, I think a lot of that passage from Beloved that's like non-narrative when they're on the Atlantic, like things like that. So all of that to say, like, what am I working on? I'm working on Beloved. No, I guess what I'm saying is, like, I think right now the things that I'm writing are a mixture of like motherhood and like kind of like classic literature or like 19th century literature. But I don't know that they're going anywhere. I don't know that there's a manuscript. I think part of like my life right now is that I write whenever I get time to do so, but I don't take the time to go back and revise. Which means like today when I was like, I'm gonna read something new, I was like, wow, I have some good stuff in here, but it's not revised, so I can't like, and I think the other thing that I've been working on is I mean, I know the other thing I've been working on is devotional, which is like a weekly email that I send out, which, speaking of writing as punishment, is kind of funny because recently I haven't wanted to write at all, and I'm like, I have to do this every week. But it's an email newsletter that I send that's kind of writing about writing and what does a life devoted to writing mean. So I should be more articulate about it by now, but I'm not.
And can people can get subscribed to that through your website?
Yeah, they can subscribe to my newsletter through my website.
Okay. Well, people should do that. Subscribe through their website. You can get escapist literature if you want at Read It Again, and along with copies of Lindsey Alexander's book, Read You in Reverse. We should probably wrap it up for the night, but you can join us all next week when we have on Megan Denton Ray and Alini Mello. So we'll see you then. Good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you so much, Nicole. Thanks, Leslie.
Bye.